Story 1. This incident occurred approximately 16 years ago, during my 12th year of life. I was an active member of a scouting organization located in Spain. The scouting approach in this region tends to be somewhat more laid back and contemporary compared to typical perceptions. Annually, during the summer season, we upheld a distinctive custom known as a raid. This involved an extensive, multi-day trekking expedition through untamed, natural environments, during which we would set up our own camps and manage our own navigation. There was no presence of adults or any form of direct oversight. It was solely us, the young participants, equipped with maps, provisions, and the various survival techniques we had assimilated. For that particular year, my designated group, comprising 15 individuals, a mix of both boys and girls, ranging in age from 12 to 14, had meticulously arranged a 3-day hiking adventure through the majestic yet formidable Pyrenees, a prominent mountain range situated in the northeastern part of Spain. Our original intention was to ascend a peak reaching nearly 10,000 feet in elevation and establish our encampment beside a glacial lake positioned close to its apex. We were fully aware that this undertaking would present a significant test of our abilities, yet our enthusiasm was palpable. We commenced our journey early in the morning and continued our trek throughout the entire day. However, as the early evening hours approached, we came to the realization that it would be impossible to arrive at the lake before nightfall. Consequently, we located a level area situated slightly off the main pathway and proceeded to establish our camp. Our setup was rudimentary, consisting merely of a few tarpaulins and sticks arranged in the vicinity of a large rock formation. It was by no means an elaborate arrangement. The nearest accessible road was positioned approximately 6 miles distant, with the closest inhabited village being even more remote. We found ourselves immersed deep within the mountainous terrain, experiencing a profound sense of isolation. Despite this, we felt secure and unburdened. In fact, the atmosphere possessed a certain enchantment. Following our evening meal, while a measure of daylight still lingered, a small contingent of us willingly offered to return to a spring we had previously encountered in order to replenish our water containers. I was among this group of volunteers. It consisted of myself and 3 companions, and we prudently brought along a pair of flashlights, anticipating the possibility of darkness before our return. True to our expectations, twilight descended upon us as we made our way back. Even then, we could still faintly discern the sounds of our main group in the distance, their laughter and singing echoing faintly. However, one of my friends abruptly halted, becoming rigid. He directed our attention to an object positioned just beyond the trail's edge, a reflective roadside marker, the sort typically found adjacent to a major roadway. Yet this particular marker was fragmented, having been torn into multiple pieces, and without a doubt, it had not been present there earlier. In an instant, the entire atmosphere underwent a dramatic alteration. Our previous state of relaxation vanished. We became acutely apprehensive. We hastily returned to our communal shelter and relayed our discovery to the others. A wave of panic rapidly propagated throughout the group. It's crucial to recall that we were merely children, and our imaginations immediately leaped to the most dire conceivable scenarios. Questions flooded our thoughts. Who else could possibly be out here with us in this remote location? What conceivable motive would compel someone to transport a demolished road sign deep into the wilderness? Two of the more senior children, both aged 14, resolved to investigate the matter. They equipped themselves with flashlights, each carrying a personal knife and a whistle, the latter intended as a signal should they encounter any difficulties. With these preparations, they vanished into the encompassing darkness. The remaining members of our group clustered together inside the shelter, maintaining a profound silence and gripped by terror. A few of the girls had begun to weep. Someone put forth the idea of singing as a means to divert our attention. Consequently, we sang softly, our voices trembling. But even this effort did not endure for an extended period. Then, a distinct sound reached our ears. Whistling. Two abrupt, piercing blasts resonated rapidly. Our companions suddenly reappeared within the camp, gasping for breath and exhibiting profound panic. They recounted having discovered something profoundly unsettling. It was a substantial wooden stake, embedded vertically in the earth, and profusely coated in blood. An alarming quantity of blood. It was an amount far too considerable for any of us to maintain our composure. Children once again began to cry, some turning to prayer. I remained seated, my grip tightened around my knife, my heart thumping vigorously, utterly persuaded that we would not survive the duration of the night. The elder boys declared their intention to go back outside. They stated their desire to confront whoever was lurking out there, asserting that if the situation escalated negatively, they would divert the individual's attention away from the rest of us. We implored them not to depart, but none of us possessed the fortitude to physically restrain them. They departed. We remained utterly motionless, as if frozen in place. Not a single person uttered a word. No one shifted their position. The shelter was enveloped in absolute stillness, broken only by the sound of heavy respiration and the sporadic sniffle. I vividly recall sitting there, consumed by the thought, I will undertake any measure necessary to survive this night. Should someone appear, I will not succumb without offering a spirited fight. Minutes seemed to stretch on interminably, and then we heard distinct footsteps, rapid, running footsteps, followed by intense screaming. This was not the sort of feigned scream employed to startle someone. It was an unequivocal expression of utter panic. We witnessed our two friends sprinting back towards our position, shouting frantically. They were clearly being pursued, and close behind them, two male figures were visible. We collectively braced ourselves, brandishing our knives, prepared to mount a defense. A man halted precisely at the periphery of our shelter, and then, to our astonishment, they began to laugh. It transpired that they were our actual camp supervisors. They had tracked our movements, remained concealed, and ultimately resolved to play a practical joke on us. Every element, the fractured sign, the simulated blood, the rabbit stick, it was entirely an elaborate fabrication, a perverse jest. We, however, found no humor in the situation. Several of the children experienced difficulty breathing due to the intensity of their crying. A number of us continued to tightly grasp our knives. We had been prepared, even willing, to engage in lethal force. It was at this precise moment that the leaders comprehended the severe extent of their misjudgment. Their ill-conceived prank had propelled 13 young individuals to the precipice of violent action. They offered repeated apologies, yet we remained indifferent. Our sole desire was for them to depart, though not to a significant distance, as we were still too profoundly terrified to sleep in solitude. Ultimately, they remained with us for the duration of the night, although it required many months for us to genuinely forgive them. That particular night is indelibly etched into my recollection. Its lasting impact stems not from the fact that violence erupted, but rather from how narrowly it was averted. In my current age, I often contemplate the precarious proximity of that evening to a vastly different conclusion. Had an individual with harmful intentions been present, they would have inadvertently selected an entirely unsuitable group of young people to target. We were undeniably petrified, yet simultaneously we were entirely poised for defensive combat. Story 2. This narrative represents one of those experiences where, upon reflection, I am compelled to question my own judgment, thinking, what on earth was I possibly contemplating? The incident transpired a few years prior, and truthfully, my predominant emotion is one of profound gratitude that the outcome was not more severe than it proved to be. For a duration of several weeks, I had been engaging in conversations with a man whom I met via a digital connection platform. He appeared to be agreeable, even conventional. Ultimately, we reached a mutual decision to arrange a face-to-face meeting. Herein lies the juncture at which I exercised remarkably poor discretion. Rather than transporting myself to the appointed rendezvous, I permitted him to collect me. My apprehension concerning driving can occasionally become quite debilitating, and at that particular moment, it simply seemed like the path of least resistance. However, I wholeheartedly regret not having simply forced myself to overcome that reluctance. My decision was undeniably imprudent, and I recognize that indiscretion now. Accordingly, he arrived outside my residence and informed me that our destination was a sushi establishment. Excellent. I am particularly fond of sushi. We then entered his vehicle. He input the restaurant's location into the global positioning system, and we proceeded on our way. Initially, everything appeared to be perfectly normal. Our conversation was informal, consisting of casual remarks and standard pleasantries. However, I subsequently began to perceive something peculiar through my window. There were trees, an abundance of them, forming what appeared to be thick woodlands, indicative of a remote, isolated landscape. And abruptly, the previously amiable atmosphere within the car underwent a change. I inquired of him, "Are we not supposed to be proceeding in the direction of the town? This does not appear to be the correct path." He briefly consulted the GPS device and stated, "I assure you, this is simply the route it's directing us along." I did not consciously select this particular way. I endeavored to maintain my composure, but internally, I was experiencing extreme distress. The thoroughfare was constricted, replete with curves, and utterly devoid of any human presence. I was unable to discern even a single dwelling or fuel station, Only an unbroken expanse of forest was visible. He must have observed my demeanor, which suggested I was on the verge of exiting the vehicle. This is inferred from his repeated assurances. I am not engaging in any unusual behavior, I promise you. However, when I attempted to access the GPS application on my mobile telephone to verify the itinerary myself, it was then that I became aware of a complete absence of mobile signal. This discovery propelled me into an extreme state of anxiety. He persisted in driving, steadfastly maintaining that the global positioning system had simply selected the most unusually circuitous route imaginable. Concurrently, I experienced both perspiration and a sensation of chilling cold, desperately attempting to appear as though I was not on the precipice of a full-blown panic attack. He even attempted to make a jest, remarking, "Should you be entertaining the notion that I possess a cadaver in the boot or a digging implement? I can assure you that I do not." Following what seemed an interminable duration, we did, in fact, arrive at a sushi establishment. I found it difficult to comprehend that we had successfully reached our destination. I was trembling as I disembarked from the vehicle. The journey had consumed nearly an hour, traversing what felt like a route plucked directly from a backwoods horror film. Nevertheless, a part of me reasoned that if he harbored malicious intent, he had already been presented with ample opportunity. If his aim was to harm me, he could have accomplished it by that point. Perhaps the individual was simply socially inept. We took our seats. I attempted to consume my meal, but my nervous system remained profoundly agitated. It was then that he presented me with an exceptionally peculiar, subsequent query. He leaned closer and inquired, "So, when do you anticipate we will engage in sexual intercourse?" I nearly suffocated on my sashimi. "Pardon me?" I uttered. He continued, as if he were negotiating a commercial transaction. He elaborated, "You know, are you the kind of person who prefers to wait a single day, or perhaps a week, or even a full month, just so I can be aware?" I simply remained seated, utterly dumbfounded. I found myself without any suitable response. Subsequently, he declared, "Well, I'm merely stating that I am unable to postpone for an entire month." My contribution to the conversation diminished significantly after that point. The entirety of the remaining date was excruciatingly uncomfortable. I simply awaited the bill and promptly requested a ride from a rideshare service. Under no circumstances was I going to re-enter that vehicle with him. The instant I settled into the rideshare vehicle, I observed something that caused my stomach to plummet once more. The journey back to my residence consumed precisely 15 minutes. 15. And the entirety of this route consisted of conventional roadways, regulated by traffic signals, populated by other vehicles, and featuring pedestrians moving about. There was not even a solitary unpaved track or disquieting forest in view. The discrepancy was baffling. Why had it required him nearly an hour to transport me to the identical location from which my rideshare departure took a mere 15 minutes? Could his global positioning system genuinely have been so severely malfunctioning? Or did he intentionally guide me along a circuitous path for some alternative, undisclosed purpose? I shall never truly ascertain the truth. Perhaps he was simply eccentric and lacking in social awareness. It is conceivable that the entire situation was entirely benign. Or perhaps I experienced exceptionally fortunate. That evening served as an immense revelation. Regardless of how ordinary an individual may appear through digital interactions, under no circumstances should one ever permit an unfamiliar person encountered via a digital connection platform to provide transportation. Always arrange to meet in a public venue. Ensure you drive yourself and unequivocally place your confidence in your inherent intuition. Story 3. In the year 2015, when I was merely 16 years of age, I resided in a minuscule, dilapidated coastal community that was scarcely discernible on any geographical chart. It epitomized the type of locale where events of significance rarely, if ever, transpired. It was so thoroughly overlooked and geographically isolated that even adjacent towns were likely unaware of its existence. For us adolescents, there were a mere 3 recreational options available to occupy our time. We could frequent the cinema, engage in swimming activities at the beach, or congregate at a rather pitiful establishment purporting to be an amusement destination known as Maplewood Midway. To label it a fun park now seems an exceedingly liberal designation. The arcade consoles were barely operational. The batting enclosures appeared as though they would crumble if subjected to undue scrutiny. And the miniature golf terrain was overgrown with pervasive weeds. However, the go-karts, that was where the situation took on a dubious character. These were not the caliber of go-karts typically encountered at professionally managed entertainment complexes. Instead, they were rickety contraptions of questionable safety, hurtling around a circuit characterized by abrupt turns and fragmented gravel. On a particular summer evening, my cousin Emma and I resolved to visit the go-kart attraction for some recreational diversion. It was approaching 10 o'clock in the evening. This hour was sufficiently late to ensure the venue would be largely uninhabited, a factor which, frankly, constituted part of its allure. I collected her, and we drove to Maplewood Midway, which is situated at the periphery of an expansive, unobstructed field. The shoreline is located several miles distant in one direction, while on the opposing side of the thoroughfare, dense woodlands extend seemingly without end. The entire location conveys the impression of existing on the very fringe of societal development. Upon our arrival, the parking area was virtually vacant. There were perhaps a pair of adolescent males idly occupying themselves within the arcade, and an elderly gentleman, likely in his mid-60s, seated in solitude on a bench adjacent to the corroded batting cages. We gave little thought to their presence, purchased our admission tickets, and proceeded towards the go-kart track. My concentration was so intensely fixed on preventing the cart from overturning during the sharp turns that I failed to observe the old man's movement towards the fence until our final circuit. It was at that moment that I perceived him standing there, positioned just beyond the protective barrier, directing at me the most unsettling expression I have ever witnessed. His countenance bore what appeared to be a fixed, fractured grin, and his eyes were remarkably dark and possessed an unnervingly peculiar sheen. Endeavoring to dismiss the unsettling sensation, I presented our second ticket to the attendant overseeing the ride, who appeared to be considerably impaired, and commenced another circuit. However, on this occasion, I found myself unable to maintain focus. My gaze repeatedly drifted towards the fence, and indeed, the individual had not altered his position. Each time I passed him, he remained precisely where he was, his eyes fixed upon me, simply standing there as if possessing an unlimited abundance of time. What truly perturbed me was his proximity to the exit gate, coupled with the fact that we had only one remaining ticket. Following that final lap, we were obliged to guide our go-karts back into the designated lanes, and naturally, he continued to be present, essentially loitering by the gate. As I disembarked from the cart, I cast a quick glance at Emma to ascertain if she was cognizant of the unfolding situation, but she appeared entirely oblivious, merely chuckling about her victory over me. As I proceeded to push open the gate, the man positioned himself directly in my path. "Greetings," he articulated, his voice coarse and parched, as if he had been deprived of hydration for an extended period. A strong odor of tobacco emanated from him. "What are you charming young women doing out here all by yourselves?" Emma approached and stood beside me, now evidently comprehending that something was amiss. What?" she inquired, her eyebrows slightly elevated. He broadened his smile, and this action sent an intensely unsettling shiver down my spine. "It's quite late at night. Are your guardians aware of your current whereabouts?" Endeavoring to maintain a semblance of composure, I fabricated a response. "Yes, they are, in fact, expecting our return. We must depart immediately." I attempted to maneuver past him, but he advanced closer and seized my shoulder. "Nonsense," he retorted. "I observed both of you arriving unaccompanied." My stomach churned with unease, confirming that he had indeed been observing us. He then proposed, "Why don't I accompany you to your vehicle?" I remained motionless, seeking assistance from Emma with my gaze. Without a moment's hesitation, she positioned herself between us and stated assertively, "Actually, we were just about to proceed to the arcade. Her male companion is scheduled to meet us there." It was an absolute fabrication. My actual male companion was not even present in town. Yet, the deception proved effective. His countenance grew grim, and the artificial smile vanished. "Boyfriend," he murmured, as if the word itself left a disagreeable sensation in his mouth. Emma did not linger. She seized my arm and propelled me in the direction of the arcade. The arcade was by then almost deserted. There were no employees, no other teenagers present, but it felt considerably more secure than remaining outside with him. We crouched behind a claw game machine, both of us panting. I whispered. I inadvertently left my cellular phone in the car. She emitted a groan. "Mine is currently recharging at home," she replied. "We are going to be compelled to make a dash for it." "You are deranged," I hissed. "What if he is anticipating our return out there?" We engaged in a back-and-forth discussion regarding the situation. Emma put forth the proposition of seeking assistance from the go-kart attendant, but the individual appeared incapable of even spelling the word help, much less offering any substantive aid. Ultimately, Emma rose to her feet. "We simply must depart immediately," she stated. We cautiously emerged, meticulously surveying the surroundings. The location was utterly silent. Every elongated shadow seemed to assume his form. Emma instructed me to prepare my keys as we approached my automobile, and I abruptly halted. "I failed to lock the vehicle," I whispered. She regarded me with wide eyes. "What?" she exclaimed. "I didn't secure it. What if he is already inside?" Emma began to advance towards the driver's side of the car to verify, and although I attempted to restrain her, she managed to elude my grasp. She leaned forward, peering intently into the obscurity. Then, unexpectedly, we detected it, the sound of heavy footsteps resonating against the paved surface. We both abruptly turned around. He was rushing towards us at maximum velocity, emerging from the forested area, as if he had been concealed there, merely awaiting our presence. We shrieked and sprinted towards the automobile. I reached for the door handle. It was locked. A profound sense of relief washed over me that I had indeed secured it. My hands were trembling as I attempted to disengage the lock. Emma was shouting from the passenger side. I ultimately threw the door open wide and lunged inside the vehicle, just as he reached my position. He commenced forcefully striking his fists against the window pane, vociferating something indecipherable to me. I engaged the central locking mechanism and forcefully inserted the key into the ignition, all while still weeping. Emma was vehemently urging me to depart, and I complied. I reversed with such rapidity that I nearly collided with a fence, then sharply turned the car around and accelerated maximally. He persisted in his pursuit, sprinting along the thoroughfare, but we did not cease our flight until we had entered the nearest town. Emma was compelled to assist me with the steering on several occasions, as my vision was severely obscured by my tears. In some manner, we successfully returned to my residence, our hearts pounding furiously and our hands quivering uncontrollably. We never disclosed the incident to anyone, neither our parents nor our friends. In retrospect, I lament that we did not. Perhaps such disclosure might have prevented that individual from inflicting harm upon another. However, at that juncture, we were apprehensive that we would be held accountable for our late presence there, or for our perceived lack of caution. We never revisited Maplewood Midway subsequent to that night. And if there is a singular piece of advice I would offer to any attentive listener, it is never to presume that a seemingly tranquil, unassuming small town is too mundane for malevolent occurrences to manifest. Story 4. This event transpired when I was 14 years of age. I had been requested to supervise my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and just barely 1 year old, respectively, in an exceedingly secluded mountainous region of Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle were attending a wedding celebration located more than an hour's journey away, and their return was not anticipated until late in the evening. Their dwelling was situated precariously on the slope of a mountain. When I emphasize its remoteness, I signify a complete absence of visible neighbors, no illumination from streetlights, and an absolute, impenetrable darkness once the sun had set. Their rear deck featured a precipitous decline, approximately 15 feet straight down a rugged, stony incline that descended into a river. Merely reaching the location necessitated precise knowledge of the correct turns, as otherwise one would assuredly fail to locate it. This was unequivocally not the sort of place an individual might inadvertently drive to. Prior to their departure, they provided me with a telephone number positioned beside the landline instrument, some pizza for our evening meal, and instructed me to contact them should any complications arise. Mobile phone reception in that vicinity was virtually non-existent, rendering the landline my sole means of communication. The infant, fortunately, remained asleep. The 4-year-old was experiencing a slight indisposition and had fallen asleep on the sofa, with the television still operating. And I was situated upstairs in the loft, engaged in playing the game Guitar Hero with my 8-year-old cousin. The architectural arrangement of the loft space was, in a way, ideal. From my vantage point, I possessed a clear view of the living room below, enabling me to monitor the younger children. Directly to my right was an expansive window offering a panoramic outlook over the driveway. Now, it is crucial to comprehend the configuration of the property. The access road leading to their residence terminated precisely at their bifurcated driveway. Should one proceed to the left, a carport was encountered. This was the customary parking area for all visitors. Conversely, if one turned to the right, the driveway descended sharply into a level expanse situated directly in front of a garage structure. No individual ever parked a vehicle in that lower area. That particular space was exclusively designated for the children's recreational activities. Bicycles, scooters, and various toys were scattered about. It resembled a veritable minefield of youthful disarray. Everyone familiar with the family was aware that this specific side of the driveway was restricted for vehicular access. So, it was approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. Completely shrouded in darkness, he gazed out the window and shook his head negatively. "No, I do not know who that is," he responded. I instructed him to descend the stairs with me so that we could verify the well-being of the other children. I was uncertain of this individual's intentions, but I was unwilling to take any risks. The infant, fortunately, remained asleep. I retrieved the landline telephone to initiate a call to emergency services, and it was at that precise moment that I detected the sound. It was the unequivocal noise of the garage door being forcefully pulled upwards. An individual was clearly attempting to elevate it. That specific garage door was perpetually disused. No one ever opened it, not even my uncle. Subsequently, I heard the adjacent door, the one equipped with a window, rattling. Someone was manipulating the doorknob, yet they were not engaging in any form of knocking. They were not vocalizing any calls. Instead, they were silently endeavoring to gain forcible entry. The illumination in that area was extinguished. They must have been aware that no one was present within that particular room. I was communicating in hushed tones with the emergency dispatcher, elaborating on the circumstances that were unfolding, and my cousin had latched onto my arm. I found it exceptionally difficult to maintain my grip on the telephone handset. My hands were trembling with severe intensity. The dispatcher informed me that she was in the process of contacting my aunt and uncle and instructed me to remain connected on the line. I pivoted to retrieve the telephone number they had previously provided, and it was at that precise moment that I observed him. There, pressed directly against the sliding glass portal, stood a man of immense stature. He was easily in excess of 6 feet tall, possessed broad shoulders, long, unkempt red hair, and a corresponding dense beard. Furthermore, the manner in which he was smiling at me was devoid of any benevolence. It was a contorted expression. I reoriented myself towards the door and exclaimed loudly, "I am currently speaking with law enforcement." The imposing man simply fixed his gaze upon me. He conveyed an appearance as if meticulously evaluating his available courses of action. Then, without uttering a single syllable, he gradually retreated backwards into the encompassing darkness. A few minutes subsequent to this, we observed the truck reversing out of the lower section of the driveway, proceeding backwards up the road, and ultimately disappearing from view. I remained immobile, maintaining the telephone connection, until a sheriff's deputy eventually arrived approximately 25 minutes later. They conducted a thorough search of the property and remained with us until my aunt and uncle returned. The moment they entered, my uncle's entire facial expression underwent a dramatic transformation. He was visibly incensed. His anger was directed not at me, but at this Mr. Jim. It transpired that he was a rather disreputable acquaintance of my uncle's, an individual whom the children had encountered on a couple of occasions in passing. My aunt immediately instructed my uncle to convey to Jim that he was never to return, and she was unequivocally serious in her directive. There was a period of raised voices, but I had ceased to truly focus on the conversation. My mind was still preoccupied with processing that unsettling smile, that penetrating stare. Subsequently, I ascertained that my uncle had been struggling with a substance dependency issue. And as for Mr. Jim, his precise intentions remain unknown, but it was abundantly clear that his presence was not for a simple social call. He was not merely knocking at the incorrect entrance. He was actively attempting to gain entry. That particular fact was indisputable. Perhaps he harbored the belief that my uncle possessed something of considerable worth, or something entirely different. I endeavored to avoid dwelling upon the incident excessively. It goes without saying that I never again undertook babysitting responsibilities at that location. And not long thereafter, my aunt initiated divorce proceedings against my uncle and relocated. I have not returned to that specific dwelling since that time. Story 5. In the region where I originate, criminal activity is practically negligible. For instance, one might hear reports of a stolen bicycle, or perhaps an altercation involving an intoxicated individual at a public house. But grave offenses such as homicide or abduction are scarcely, if ever, present here. Consequently, it is not uncommon for individuals to perambulate unaccompanied during nocturnal hours without a second thought. Nevertheless, I hail from a diminutive town completely encircled by dense forests, and frankly, those woodlands instill within me a profound sense of unease. I typically refrain from venturing out by myself during the nighttime hours, but when accompanied by friends, I deeply appreciate the tranquility and stillness afforded by an evening stroll. Only last week, my closest friend and I resolved to embark upon one of our customary ambulations. It constitutes a route we have traversed innumerable times. We are intimately familiar with its every contour. We were simply conversing and laughing as per usual, not even remotely contemplating anything alarming. The initial segment of our pathway is pleasant and serene, illuminated by overhead streetlights with a scattering of residential dwellings in the vicinity. The area is not densely populated, but there are sufficient structures to prevent a complete sensation of solitude. Subsequently, we arrived at a tunnel that delineates the commencement of the more dimly lit portion of our walk. At this point, the paved surface concludes, and an uneven, gravelly road takes its place. As we approached the tunnel, we immediately perceived something unusual. A white utility vehicle was stationary, positioned off to the side, directly adjacent to the roadside ditch. It was merely parked there, with its engine disengaged, and its presence instantly engendered a sense of disquiet within us. We nervously attempted to lighten the mood with jests, such as, "Haha, it appears someone intends to tail us." We endeavored to dismiss the apprehension. However, as we passed the vehicle, I focused my gaze more intently and felt certain I discerned a human silhouette within its interior. My companion expressed irritation at my observation, believing I was deliberately attempting to frighten her. Once we had navigated through the tunnel, the thoroughfare executed an abrupt left turn and began to ascend. The climb was neither protracted nor particularly steep, and having reached the summit, one then proceeds downhill into a segment of the road that possesses a somewhat unsettling quality. On one side, a dense forest extends, while on the opposite side, an expansive, open field dedicated to the cultivation of hops is visible. And during the nocturnal hours, the environment out there is impenetrably dark. There are no artificial lights, no residential structures, merely our presence and the sound of gravel crunching beneath our footwear. Despite this, we continued our conversation and laughter, attempting to disregard the profound darkness, when we abruptly perceived a light originating from behind us. Initially, we assumed it was simply an automobile approaching from one of the agricultural properties further along the road. Such occurrences are not atypical. Individuals reside and labor in that rural area. Consequently, we casually shifted to the side and continued our progression. Subsequently, we cast another glance behind us, and it was indeed the identical white utility vehicle we had observed earlier. We ceased all conversation. Both of us became completely silent. The van, moreover, was not merely driving past us. It was instead slowly advancing directly behind us. We quickened our pace slightly, but the vehicle maintained a precise match to our speed. When we decelerated, it also decelerated. When we accelerated, its engine similarly revved in response. It was at this juncture that I experienced the onset of absolute panic. I nudged my friend on the arm, met her gaze directly, and instructed, "Enter the field immediately." Without any delay, both of us commenced running, stumbling through the cultivated rows of soil and plants within the hops field, making a concerted effort to avoid tripping over any obstacles. We ultimately dropped to a position behind one of the earthen mounds and crouched there, our hearts thumping forcefully, holding our breath. The van then came to a complete halt, its headlamps activated, illuminating the field with their high beams. Subsequently, the doors opened and two male individuals exited the vehicle. Both had their hoods raised and each carried a portable light source. They began directing the beams of their flashlights across the field, systematically surveying the area. evidently searching for something or someone. For what seemed an interminable duration, we remained utterly motionless. We simply stayed in our crouched posture, diligently striving to produce no sound whatsoever. Eventually, they re-entered the utility vehicle, executed a U-turn directly on the roadway, and slowly departed in the direction from which they had arrived. The very instant they were no longer visible, we sprinted through the remaining expanse of the field. Residential structures began to reappear near the field's periphery. Therefore, once we were once again enveloped by the ambient glow of a street lamp, we finally permitted ourselves to respire freely. I remain unaware of the identities of those individuals or their precise intentions, but I have never before experienced such a persistent pursuit of that nature. And that particular night proved sufficient to deter both of us from utilizing that specific pathway for a considerably extended duration. Story 6. This incident occurred in the year 2016, and truthfully, I had not contemplated it for a substantial period until this very evening. I found myself unable to achieve sleep, and unexpectedly, this recollection stealthily resurfaced in my consciousness, akin to a cautionary signal I very nearly disregarded. At that juncture, I had recently returned to my former university town, subsequent to a difficult romantic separation. I was temporarily residing in a modest apartment shared with a friend, and was urgently striving to secure employment. The nature of the work was inconsequential to me. Whether in a restaurant, retail, or any other sector, I simply required a source of income. I was submitting applications via all the conventional online platforms, but my primary reliance was on Work Connect, due to its facilitating ease in monitoring submissions and receiving status updates. Furthermore, I had applied directly to a few establishments through their proprietary websites and meticulously maintained records of all applications. Several weeks into my active search for employment, I received a telephone call from a number unfamiliar to me. The area code was not even native to my state of residence, but given my pressing need for work, I answered the call. A female voice was on the line. She conveyed a professional demeanor and informed me that her purpose in calling was to schedule an interview for a particular position I had purportedly applied for. The critical detail was that I did not recognize the name of the company whatsoever. My portable computer was already open and active. Therefore, while still engaged in the telephone conversation, I began to review my application history on Work Connect. I even cross-referenced the companies to which I had directly submitted applications. There was no record that corresponded with the information provided. Nevertheless, I maintained a composed facade and did not reveal my uncertainty. I conjectured that perhaps I had applied late one evening and subsequently forgotten the specific submission. I requested the precise street address, meticulously transcribed it, and expressed my gratitude. Yet, something about the entirety of the telephone call simply felt incongruous. She exhibited an insistent demeanor regarding my attendance that very same evening. There was no offer of flexibility, rather a persistent demand that I present myself around twilight. Following the conclusion of our call, that burgeoning sensation of apprehension rapidly intensified. I promptly investigated the telephone number from which she had initiated contact. The result was nothing. It bore no association with any commercial enterprise whatsoever. Subsequently, I performed a search for the provided street address. It was at that moment that my stomach clenched with dread. The location was situated far into an isolated, remote area, requiring nearly an hour's drive from my current residence, and it was not even remotely proximate to the geographical zones in which I had been submitting applications. I launched the Street Site application and meticulously examined the designated address. What presented itself on the screen was essentially a cluster of dilapidated structures located off an exit ramp. There were no visible signs, no discernible commercial frontages, merely this seemingly deserted expanse of road and unoccupied parking areas. The appearance suggested a site more suited for the disposal of a malfunctioning appliance than for the conducting of professional interviews. As I fixated on that display, visualizing my own journey to that remote location around sundown, an internal alarm unequivocally urged me not to proceed. It felt as though my entire physiological being was issuing a stark warning. I brought the matter to the attention of my roommate, meticulously elaborating on the entire situation, and even he expressed uncertainty. He advised me that I might be engaging in excessive analysis, but he also affirmed that if I harbored any sense of unease, I ought to place my confidence in that innate instinct. I chose not to attend, and truthfully, I am profoundly relieved that I made that decision. With the passage of time, my comprehension of just how dubious the entire affair was has only deepened. Considering the elements, a fabricated employment interview scheduled at a geographically isolated location, hastily arranged to occur during nocturnal hours, my unequivocal response is negative. In retrospect, I genuinely regret not having reported the matter to law enforcement, but I had previously attempted to engage with them a year prior, when a former partner was subjecting me to harassment, and their response was minimally serious. Consequently, I lacked confidence in their willingness to genuinely address the situation. To the present moment, I remain unaware of what awaited me at that specified address. However, the contemplation of what unfortunate events might have transpired had I actually presented myself there is profoundly chilling.